Yes. Hi, everybody. So the novel, as you know, is The Paper Birds, and it is set in 1943 in Canada, and specifically, I think a place you all know fairly well, Mimico, Ontario, and it is set in the a lot of it in the basement of um, a quote unquote cottage. I remember the Mimico, the estates, and those lovely houses along Lake Ontario. And I guess I'll say right up front that I love that part of Ontario and that part of Etobicoke. And I lived in Mimico for not too long, but I lived in Mimico for a while, just off Royal York Road when I was a graduate student at York University. And I just really remember the area fondly, and there's something about some kind of hypnotic pull that makes me go back to that area. I just take the bus right down Royal York Road or down Islington, and I walk through New Toronto and Mimico, and I walk down to Marie Curtis Park, and I just love the area. I keep going back there, and I thought I'd like to set my novel in this wonderful area. And for historical reasons, of course, as you probably also know, there was a lot of industry in Mimico and Long Branch and just all the way right down along the lake. In the early 1940s, there was Tire and Rubber, there was Campbell Soup, there was Donnell and Mudge Tannery, there was the reformatory that was then repurposed during World War II as a prisoner of war camp. So, there was just such interesting history in the area, and I had lived there. I could kind of feel what the air felt like, and I go back a couple of times every summer and just spend half a day back in my old stomping ground. So this novel takes place in 1943. It's a really hot, sweltering summer. The protagonist is a 19-year-old girl named Gemma Sullivan. The war has been going on. Canada's been in the war by this point for about 5 years. So Gemma has just graduated from high school, and she lives with her aunt who has failing eyesight, and they're just barely scraping along. So this young girl, Gemma, needs to get work for, at least for the summer. So she thinks she has applied for a job at an office. So this is just a brief scene from her job interview. It's in the basement of a house right on the lake, and she's interviewed by a fairly eccentric woman named Beatrice Fearing, Miss Fearing. So this is just a scene from the interview, and Jenna really doesn't know what she's getting into here. Here we work with language and numbers. Can you give me an example of a code, Miss Sullivan? Her hands damp with sweat, Gemma ventured. A telephone number, maybe? Miss Fearing leaned forwards, looming closer to Jem. Everything is a code, she began. Stars in the night sky, the camber of a swallow's wing, a soldier's wink, Mayday, the color blue, a pulse, a gong, a chime, a poem. 7 short blasts from a ship's horn, a musical score, slashes of paint on a cave wall, a stained glass window, a white flag, bloomers pegged to a wash line, sorrowed with coal soot, grayed, unrequited, and bells, always bells, a shriek between jaws, a bone, a heart, column of smoke from a fire. She paused, for effect, Jem supposed. Then more. Dit, dot, dot, dash, Ave Maria, Wilco, a girl riding a bicycle, her hand signaling a turn, a raven's swoop near your shoulder, some consider a sign from a departed one, a cross. The messages contained in our cells that scientists are only now starting to discover. We're living codes. So the whole world is a code, infinitely more abundant than a mere phone number. Gemma didn't sense a question here, so she pressed her damp palms together as if in prayer. Miss Fearing looked straight at Jem. What do you think this war's most important weapon is, Miss Sullivan? A lake gull mewled out in the summer day. How Jem wished its cry held the answer. She fumbled again. Guns? Miss Fearing's lips flattened. Intelligence, information, A million signals whiz through the air on any given day. She paused as if to reflect. All this is so simple, yet so complex, she went on. We're trying to get supply ships over to Britain through the perilous shark-filled waters of the Atlantic. The sharks are German submarines, U-boats, but they too need supplies, fuel. A couple of months ago, thanks to work like ours, our ships dodged numerous U-boats. This work takes grit. Do you possess grit, Miss Sullivan? Gemma honestly didn't know and said as much. Um, so that's one little segment from the job interview. The interview chapter, if you've read the novel, goes on for quite some time. Miss Fearing is really grilling this young girl about code breaking and communications and language and writing and all kinds of things. And so there's all kinds of tests that this girl's made to do. So just a little bit further into the interview, Miss Fearing slid a small book across the desk to Jem. Open it at page 137 and read Emily Dickinson's poem numbered XLIV. Gemma found the page. She read, waited. Well executed, Miss Sullivan. Can you decode this poem? Do you know what it means? Jem quivered with nerves. Much hung in the balance of her answer. She sighed and thought she'd better be honest. I'm sorry. I can't make head or tail of it. Instead of the dismay Gemma expected, Miss Fearing laughed. A single wallop of drollery. Neither can I, Miss Sullivan. What a shame Emily Dickinson can't return from the dead. She'd be wondrous as a codebreaker. So that's just a little taste from the job interview, and Gemma does find out that, oh my gosh, I've signed the Official Secrets Act. I got a job working as a code breaker. I have no idea what that entails or what I'm doing. But Miss Fearing, as Miss Fearing puts it to her, do you want to help end the war or not? And how can you say no to that, right? So Gemma signs the Official Secrets Act and begins her job as a code breaker on the shores of Lake Ontario in Mimico. So that's just a little sample from the novel. So I look forward to your questions.
Thanks a lot, Jennette. Those were really lovely passages, and I want to thank you for sharing those with us. And I do notice from the other books you've written that you have written a lot of poetry in addition to the titles of fiction you've written. And this you write like a poet. I mean, just listening to that first passage. So I'm a person who reads the book in book form rather than listening to it in audio. But listening to you read that first section where she was talking, where Miss Fearing was talking about all the different codes, like it was like music, the words and the descriptions you used. And so thank you for that. And that
Thank
actually
you.
leads me into this question, which is about poetry. And there was a lot of poetry in this book. Both Aunt Ren and Toby are really related to Edna St. Vincent Millay and her poetry. Shakespeare's sonnets were the key to one of the big deciphers in the book. And you led off section two with a poem by Marjorie Pickthall, who I wasn't familiar with, but I see she was a very early Canadian poet. And so I wondered why you chose those poets in particular. Like, are they favorites of yours, or did they just seem to fit the theme of the book?
Thank you. That's a great question. They kind of fit the theme of the book. And I have been interested in Edna St. Vincent Millay for some time, and I remember how popular she was, in the earlier, like in the 20th century, and her famous poems. And I sort of thought, what would some of the things be these characters might be reading around that time period? I guess it would be, around in the 1920s, and it did seem reasonable that Aunt Ren might be reading Edna St. Vincent Millay's poems. Um, so it was, I've sort of always think like writing historical fiction, you always have to try to imagine what were people, it's completely speculative, right? We can't really know, but what were people reading at the time? What kind of music were they listening to? What were they thinking about? And Edna St. Vincent Millay was so popular at the time. We would say today that, she went viral, especially with that one poem, I burn my candle at both ends, it will not last the night. Very much an expression of the roaring 20s. So it seemed like it might be feasible that book would be popular at the time, and Aunt Ren might be reading it. Marjorie Pickthall epigraph is a little bit more whimsical. I was thinking about women poets who've been to some degree all but forgotten. So as a way to kind of um, I don't know, just kind of give a nod to a woman poet earlier Canada. And if I'm being really honest, poetry or literature after out before a certain date has passed through a copyright, so I didn't have to pay lots of money to get a permission, which I have done. So there's some certain practical concerns too. The poem, I've loved the poem from the epigraph by Liesl Mueller, whose family had fled the Nazis, but it did cost me some money to obtain the permission from that. So there's a mixture of practical considerations and just I guess imagination.
Yeah, that's awesome. Um, you really love words, and I loved the wordplay in this book. Aunt Ren was an avid crossword solver, and she converted Rooney to be someone who enjoyed crosswords too. In fact, if I can just read on the very first page, part of this sentence I thought was so beautiful. You were talking about crosswords, and you write, they were a portal, a pleasurable escape, mode of travel, dream realm, rich with words that often surprised and tickled the tongue. I just thought that was so beautiful. Um, and then there were, as you mentioned, all of the codes. The women were working as code breakers, and they often had nicknames and pet names for each other. So I wondered, are you first of all, are you someone who enjoys crosswords or other types of wordplay? And do you, also because there's a mathematical element to it, do you enjoy the mathematical part of codes?
That's another really great question. I am terrible at math. I did quite a lot of research on code breaking, and yes, absolutely. There's this whole mathematical side to it. It's like wildly complex. I mean, if anyone in the group's seen the movie The Imitation Game, that was about Alan Turing cracking the Enigma code at Bletchley Park. That was very sort of very primitive early computer science, but it was also math. And oh my gosh, I read and read, and I the more I got into it, the more I thought, I can't even pretend to know what any of this means at all. And then the more I researched, I realized that, oh, yes, lots and lots and lots of math, but code breaking in World War II had this whole other linguistic side to it. So at Bletchley Park, they were hiring at first a lot of people from like Oxford and Cambridge, and they were hiring mathematicians, but they were also hiring language people. They were hiring linguists and morphologists and people who spoke, German and Japanese and. So the more I read, and then I read about Leo Marx, who had written those famous code poems in the 1940s. He was British, and the code would be embedded in a poem that he would write. So the more I thought, I'm not going to be able to do much with numbers. I cannot fake this. Why don't I lean into what I know and what I love and what I'm comfortable with? So I decided just lean into the whole linguistic side of code breaking words, right? Which were a real thing. The frequency analysis and reading coded messages and seeing which letters are repeated and all that. So once I allowed myself to just I can't be a mathematician. I'm just gonna lean into linguistics. Then I began to have fun, and apparently when I did a lot of research about Bletchley Park in England, and apparently when they would interview somebody to work at Bletchley Park, one of the questions they would ask was, "Do you enjoy crossword puzzles?" Because to some extent, code breaking was like cracking a puzzle. I do like crossword puzzles, but I will say that every day I start my day with coffee and Wordle, and I for many years have been addicted to computer Scrabble. So I guess I'm more of a Scrabble person than a crossword puzzle person, but I like them a lot. I know people who are exceptionally good at them. There is a certain kind of lateral thinking or something that makes people good at crosswords. But that whole Bletchley Park set, they were really into like word games and crosswords and things like that. So I liked it that code breaking had this sort of whole math side to it, like cryptography and all that, but it also had this whole linguistic side to it.
Right. So maybe if the book had been set 30 or 40 years earlier, Aunt Wren would have been one of the code breakers.
Yeah, yeah, quite possibly. Yes, yes.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the title. And you mentioned in a couple of places in the book where the phrase paper birds comes from. And it's, I guess, from my point of view, it's kind of sad as a modern woman looking back and realizing how important these women were to the war effort. And yet, at the end of the war, they were expected to be like paper birds and fly away. And I wondered, um, like, as a modern woman, and I guess as the author, how did you feel about that? Like, was that tough for you to reconcile? Or did you go into the book knowing that's just the way it was?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. You really articulated it well. That the paper birds. Well, first off, titles of novels are really hard. And my editor at HarperCollins and myself, we went back and forth with a whole bunch of titles, and we tried to get the word code in the title, but things like the Rose Code, the Da Vinci Code. I mean, it's kind of been already taken, right? And Codebreaker doesn't have a lot of a poetic feel to it. So I absolutely thought about this notion of women's contribution to the war effort. Pardon me, and how vital it was. They do say that the work of women codebreakers shortened World War II by at least 2 years. But then I also thought about, at the end of World War II, all these women who had been building airplanes and things I wrote about in my first novel, The Factory Voice. All this work, women will, building airplanes, working as codebreakers, working in intelligence. It was just like, okay, we're done. We don't need you anymore. Get out. I found that very just very kind of cruel almost. Like some women stayed in the workforce, but yeah. So I'm trying to capture kind of the ephemeral quality of that, and paper is not something that if it gets rained on, it's ruined, right? So I wanted an image that was kind of fleeting and ephemeral. And the boss, Miss Fearing, she's quite a quirky lady. So when she dismisses the girls every day, she says, "Fly away, paper birds." But it's more than that. It does reflect, as you've already said so eloquently, it does reflect that notion of this sort of passing ephemeral period of time when these women were so vital, and then kind of just, well, you're done, get out.
Hmm. There were a lot of distinctive characters in this book with things that happened to them that were quite unique or unusual. There was Gemma, who lost her parents in a drowning accident, Miss Fearing, who trained at Bletchley Park, that you were talking about earlier, and Rooney, who left a child behind up north to come and sort of reestablish herself. And I was curious, just because so many of them seemed very real, I was wondering if any of these characters were either partially or quite a lot modeled after any real life people.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, characters in fiction always, not always, I shouldn't generalize. Characters in fiction often they're often composites of different people wrapped into one character. Um, I think probably there's a bit of my own mother in Aunt Ren. I mean, she wasn't born in 1879 or something like that, but at certain times I would hear Aunt Ren's voice, and I would be hearing in a way my mother's voice, right? So I think there's probably some of my own mother in Aunt Ren. Um, some people have said that the Gemma character is a little bit like me in a way, kind of goofy. So they're not literally tied to real people, but there's always ways that for me anyway, um, characters, yeah, they come from somewhere, that somehow is part of oneself. And I didn't leave a child behind in northern Ontario, but I have traveled quite a distance too as a young woman to to take up work and to take up jobs. So I know what that's like to land in a place where you don't know anybody. So there are little bits and pieces of I guess a person in each of these characters, but no, nobody like specifically tied to, like in my first novel, the character Muriel McGregor, the aeronautical engineer at the airplane factory in Fort William. She actually was based very closely on Elsie McGill, who is a real person and was Canada's first woman aeronautical engineer. So in that case, I have done that. But in the Paper Birds, these are more fictional characters. There was a lady math professor at the University of Toronto in the 19 like 20s or 30s, and I looked into her a little bit. But I think Miss Fearing is by all intents made up. I'm a teacher, maybe a bit odd, so there's just like little bits of me in all the characters, I guess. Long-winded answer, sorry.
Oh, no, that's great. Thank you. And so while we're talking about some of those characters, I loved the names that you gave them. And to the extent that the names were so great, I actually Googled them because it felt like they must have been names of people in real life. And I wrote some of them down: Cora Lynn Ponder, Hester Hobbs, Ada Swift, Rooney Delacroix, Peggy or Margaret Fricker. Like those all, and I can't really explain why. They didn't seem like names of made up characters. They
Oh,
seemed
thank you.
like real people names. And yeah, like I said, I found myself Googling them. I thought maybe Cora Lynn was an actual mathematician at the time. And so maybe this is a simple question, but I was curious how you came up with all these great names.
Oh, well, thank you. Titles are hard, and names are also hard. Uh, well, the internet is helpful. I do look online for what names were popular, what were the most popular baby names of say 1920, or so I do look online at like endless lists of things. Um, and it's funny because you just try all these names and they don't feel real, or they don't kind of sit, they don't hit my ear the right way, or um and it takes a lot of, like, I make lists and lists and play with names and put first names and last names together, and it's an odd thing, where suddenly, aha, that's that character's name, and I don't know what it is. It's some kind of gut intuition or something like that. Sometimes I will name a character after, like, say, a musician I really like, or an artist I really like, uh, and that's a kind of more of a playful thing, but it still has to sound right to my ear when you put the first name in and it has to sound like it fits the historical period. So, Coraline sounded kind of old fashioned to me. Hester did. I don't know how I got Ran. Maybe I was looking at thinking of birds and bird imagery or something like that. Gemma Sullivan, that character had a different name. In an earlier draft, I had her named Natalia and then shortened to Tally, like, Tally. But my editor said no, like the love interest, Toby. She said no, Toby and Tally, it's too similar. Readers will get confused. So these things get sort of put through the mill, and then finally you settle. But it takes quite a bit of. It's fun, but it's sort of strange. Like, it's almost an uncanny thing. Yes, that is who that character is.
Hmm. And maybe you'll get to use Tully in another book.
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
So while we're talking about some of these secondary characters, I did really enjoy the secondary characters and I guess the more secondary plots. And there were a couple of them I thought that in particular really related to social issues at the time. One of them obviously was Rooney, who had a child out of wedlock and was in a like it sounded like she had been shamed by her family and had come to the South to establish herself. And another one similar to that was Miss Fearing's friend Peggy, and the fact that two women were having a relationship, which was not commonly talked about at that time. And so I was curious why you decided to interpret these like social interest stories into the book.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a great question. I mean, I think probably my stories are primarily for entertainment, I guess. But I do like to try to engage with some social issues. I For a long time I've read about and unwed the shame on single unwed mothers. In the early years of the 20th century, and how these girls would be suddenly going away to stay with their aunt for a while, or something like that. So I researched into that quite a bit, and I thought about how hard that would be. um, Also, how hard, I guess maybe I'm interested in women. I'm interested in women who have secrets, and a lot of women have secrets, and it would not have been very accepted, I don't think, for two women to be in a relationship. So I thought that might build that character. And also, if Miss Fearing have somebody, people who had loved ones overseas, work in the war, that would, to me, that would, of course, everyone wanted to help, but all that much more, the urgency to end this nightmare, because my loved one is over there. And yeah, poor Rooney is just trying to um, establish herself. So I have a lot of had a lot of empathy, I guess, with girls who were in that situation, or with women who had to keep their relationships secret. Um, and of course, I mean, fiction does thrive on secrets and intrigue, and that all that too.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned secrets because secrecy around what the women were doing in the cottage, and really secrecy around the whole war effort at the time. Like people just were not talking or were not supposed to talk. and you talked about women having secrets. And I guess one of the biggest secrets in the book was when Gemma met Toby and couldn't, at first she thought he was the enemy, and she certainly couldn't tell anyone about him and was worried. I was actually worried that someone was going to find out about their relationship, and then her status in the cottage would be threatened. And so I was curious about how you came up with the idea of her having a love interest that at first seemed to be the enemy.
Right. Well, forbidden love is a trope in romance and in literature, and um, yeah. Well, okay. So I guess the research comes in a little bit here too. There was this book that just came out not long ago, maybe 2024 even, by Helen Fry, and it's really really good. It's called Women in Intelligence, and there's a chapter in it called The Listeners. And she Helen Fry is a scholar. She writes about in World War II people who were like plants in prisoner of war camps who would their whole sort of role was to just listen and see what information they could pick up, because as she said that people in prisoner of war camps they would talk, and somebody eavesdropping on them might learn quite a bit of the enemy's secrets. So she was more, yeah, so I thought, well, what if Toby was in this kind of position where he's actually with the allies but trying to learn what he can in this POW camp. So that was kind of where that came from. I you know, and I guess I want him to be a good guy. I am a romantic, and it is a romance. But I was fascinated by the boys' reformatory in Mimico that had been converted into a prisoner of war camp. There's some really good scholarship on it, and it was by all accounts a pretty nasty place, badly run, badly organized. And I thought this poor young man would be having to be stay in here and be stuck in here, and how hard that would be. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, Beth.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's perfect. Thank you. I wanted to ask about, I think this was my favorite part of the book. And it's the part that was set at the Palais Royal.
Oh, yeah.
When they were practicing the dancing, but and talking about it in advance, and all of the bands that played there. But when we actually got to the Palais Royal, it was kind of magical the way you wrote about it. The light and the music and the excitement in the people, and it really felt like there was so much stress in the world that this was their way of letting loose. And I even liked reading about, some of the dances were forbidden because people just got too carried away. Like, I just loved that whole section. And I was curious about, like, so I've been to the Palais Royal a couple of times now that it's been refurbished, and it's lovely. But I almost felt like reading that, I almost felt like I could hear the ghosts of the 1940s playing. It was really lovely. And so I was curious about how you researched that, and if you went back to the new Palais Royal to see what it's like now, or if it all came from your imagination.
I did go to the new Palais Royale. I think it was in the summer of 23. I contacted the Palais Royale, and I said I was writing a novel, and a chunk of it, a scene from it, of the chapter took place in the Palais Royale, and how it would help so much if I could be allowed to just go there and spend a little time, and just be in that space. I read up about it too, and about some of the renovations. There's a book about old dance halls in Ontario that was really interesting. So I got to go. They said, "Yeah, sure, come on down," and they didn't seem to mind my just wandering around, and it really was magical. Like you've been in it, so the way they've done it is very tasteful and very beautiful. There's a section, I think it's downstairs, where they've got a whole wall of kind of a gallery of some of the musicians who played there, especially the house band, the Bert Niazzi's band, and beautiful portraits of these gentlemen. And oh, I just thought this would be, if you went there at that time, that this would be like walking through some kind of portal. And I read about the history of it, which was very interesting, that there had been a boat works there. And when you go there now, you can still see those, they called slips, where they slide the boats down into Lake Ontario. There you could still see the traces of that. You could see the terrace where they might have gone and stood under the moonlight. I couldn't find everything out. I had to make up some things. Like I couldn't quite tell. I very much doubt there was any alcohol allowed in there, but you know, people being what they are, they find find ways. And so it was wonderful. And there was music playing, and I was the only one there, and I was just in heaven. It's a fabulous place. I'm so glad it's been it's still there as a venue. It's gorgeous.
It is
I'm sure
gorgeous.
some developer has their eye on that can, I mean, you imagine the value of that. But I love that chunk of Canadian history. It's not that many old dance halls left.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved that too. And I also loved that I think for all of them, it was their first time there. Maybe Ada had been there once before, but I think for all the others, it was their first time. So we were seeing it with their sense of excitement and their sense of wonder. Yeah.
Yes, and apparently this whole business of having to have like dance tickets, you had to like flash your ticket if you wanted to dance with somebody. That was apparently a thing. And the jitterbugging was not allowed because it got too crazy. That was apparently a thing. Yeah, so it's really a wonderful, yeah, it was like a magic portal they went through.
Yeah, that was really great. Um, I really enjoyed the relationship between Aunt Wren and Lyle. And as I read about Aunt Wren and her history, I realized that even though, like, it seems like I've read a fair number of books set in the Second World War, um, or even post Second World War, I I haven't read a lot of books that dealt with women losing their sweethearts and her affection toward and I'm not remembering his name.
Adam?
Yes, was really palpable and I thought it was really moving. And so what inspired you to make that a part of her history?
Right. Well, I started to think about the time frame of the First World War and then the time frame of the Second World War, and I thought, well, you know, 1918 to 1939. I'm not, as I say, I'm not good at numbers or math, but 21-ish years or something. I started to think I wasn't that awful far apart, those two wars, and I started to wonder about the kind of way that the trauma of the first war might have still carried forward. And so I was thinking about that. I wanted to have an older character, Aunt Ren. I was thinking about a lot about grief, and reading sort of self-help books on grief and mourning, and it's wonderful if they help people. They probably really help people, and that's great. But I was thinking all about reading the process of grief and the five steps, or this whatever the I don't know how many steps, but the steps that you go through, and then you grieve and you go through the process, and then you move on, and you're better supposedly. And I thought, well, what if you can't? What if you just can't? And Aunt Ren couldn't for years have get over that losing her sweetheart. So okay, that's, I know it's a little bit melodramatic, but I sometimes would push back a little bit and make it sound kind of not easy, but go through these steps and then you'll be better. And I thought, well, what if you're not? And I did want an older character. I got really obsessed with hat making and the anti-plumage movement, which I didn't know anything about, and I started reading, and I was really fascinated with that. So that's another bird kind of reference as well. Like she didn't want to put any feathers on her the hats that she made.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said that maybe it was a bit melodramatic, and I didn't find it melodramatic. I like it really made sense that she was so busy, taking care of her niece that she had, suddenly had responsibility for, and she was having to work. Like it made sense that for a long time she wasn't able to work through the grief. But there was a point when she said, and I think she said this to Gemma, that just all of a sudden she realized something was gone. And it was almost as if, like, the hard part of that grief was gone. And she still had, like, you never leave grief behind. So she still had a little bit of it, but it really felt like it was a lot softer. And it felt like she was ready to move on. And I thought that was really, for a secondary character, I thought that was a really beautiful transition.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, she was someone who was took a hard line, convinced she would never, find love again, And okay, yes, I'm a cheesy romantic, but that could happen later in life, right? So yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sometimes when we read history, especially I would say historical fiction, it can shine a light on the present. And so I wondered if there was, if you, as the author, noticed any similarities between that time and the time we're living in, or if thinking back on it now, you can say, yeah, maybe the present that we're in helped inform parts of the history of this book.
Wow, that's a really great question. Well, I don't know if I have a direct correlation. I've always been fascinated with women's work and ways that it's never been maybe valued as much as it should be. Um, well, one thing that did resonate with the present was I don't know if any one of your book group noticed, but in the last 4 or 5 years, there have been obituaries come out of women who worked as codebreakers in World War II, and it just suddenly was there, kind of in the zeitgeist, and I thought about it so much, and I thought, what would it would be so weird to not say what you did, like for your whole life, like what did you do during the war? Oh, I was a file clerk, I was a secretary, I was a typist. So these women had signed the official Secrets Act of Canada, and to their deathbed were not supposed to say what they did in the war. And I've just found that really fascinating. And but then starting around the 1970s, a lot of the information was starting to be declassified. And so, these obituaries were coming out about these women who had done these incredible things during World War II. There was the most recent one was about a woman obituary in Ottawa who had worked in real life in Ottawa at the what was called the examination unit, and she was a stellar code breaker. So I thought about how finally these women, in a way, are being paid their due, so at the end of their life, but still. So there was that. Then the Imitation Game came out, and was wildly popular and everything. So I guess a lot of things about code breaking was kind of just in the zeitgeist in the last few years, and maybe that's partly what I was thinking about. But I found these obituaries very poignant, and these were real women doing these jobs and never could speak of it. I don't know what it is about keeping a secret for your whole life, but like, because we just, first thing we meet somebody, oh, what do you do? Our whole identities are so wrapped in our profession and our work and what we do. And what if you always have to have this fiction of that?
Especially when presumably it was a huge part of your life.
Yes. Yeah. So apparently there's families, the real women, there by all accounts, their spouses didn't know, their families didn't know. They kept that secret.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question about the writing of this book. Sometimes authors go into a book knowing exactly the way they want it to play out. And other times, writers will go in thinking, well, these are the characters and these are the situations, and we'll see what happens. And I was curious about what way you write.
Right. Well, there's a popular saying in the writing world that there's two kinds of writers. You're either a plotter, Plotter, you're either a plotter or a pantser. And a pantser is one who flies by the seat of their pants and they just sort of grope their way along. They don't feeling their way along. Sometimes it's compared to driving a car at night with the headlights on low. A plotter will make outlines and know exactly where they're going. I'm a pantser. I am just through some kind of raw intuition, just feeling my way along. I'd rather be a plotter. It would be a lot less, I think it would be a lot less nerve wracking to know where you were going and to have it all mapped out and outlined. But I've tried and I just don't seem to work that way. And I find like if I'm inhabiting the characters enough, it sounds weird, but they do to some degree direct me where I should go next. And I have a very general idea. I mean, I know it's going to be a romance, so I do know at some point that girl meets boy, girl loses boy, and I do know at some point that there how things will resolve, but I don't really know how. It's just trial and error. I am a pantser.
Okay. So, as you were writing it, what was the biggest surprise for you?
Oh, um, what a great question. The biggest surprise. Well, and maybe Aunt Ren's trajectory, because I don't think I knew at the start that, pardon me, Aunt Ren would meet someone and find love again. I think I just initially she was more of a sort of tragic figure, struggling away with her seamstress work, and I think getting her love story mobilized maybe was so she needs new glasses. Wait a minute. What about the ophthalmologist? What about the optometrist? So I think that her story took me in a nice surprising direction.
Yeah. It looks like I have time for one more question. So, I will ask you what you're working on now and what we can expect to see from you next.
Oh, okay. I'm working on a book of personal essays, quite different from historical novels. It's being published by Thistledown Press in Saskatoon, and it's coming out in 2026. Interestingly enough, my wonderful editor, the woman editing these essays, lives on Birmingham Street in New Toronto, probably where Donnell and Mudge Tannery was. I've worked with his editor before. She's fabulous. So I'm editing this collection of essays, personal essays, and it's called Apron Apocalypse, and it's very very different and from historical novels. But that's coming out in 2026. So until I finish the editing, I can't really think too much about. I want to go back to historical fiction and women's lives. So I have a couple of ideas, but I probably won't be able to delve in too much for about another maybe 6 months. But I'm dying to get at it.
Yeah, that
And I
makes
get to
sense.
talk
Well,
to book clubs and do lots of cool things. And Beth, your questions were wonderful. Really, really, really great questions.
thank you so much. Well, it was a delight talking to you and getting to know you. And I really enjoyed reading this book. I loved the local connection. And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, and the Islington Book Club. I'll be back down in Mimico again this summer. I'll be back at that fabulous bakery down in Royal York Road, and yeah, it's such a great part of Ontario. So thank you for having me, and again those great questions.
San Remo's, we can taste it as you
That's
talk
the
about
one.
it.
That's
Yeah,
the
we
one.
know,
That's the
Jeanette.
one. And the one day I went down there, darn it, that was the one day it was closed.
Yeah,
I
we
have to
often
go back
have
to that bakery.
Yeah, we often have those goodies after church at Islington. So,
Yeah, yeah.
um, we want to bless you into the finishing of the next work that you've been inspired to share. We
Thank
want
you.
you to own the Pantsy title because sometimes we can get caught up in comparing and thinking one way, but your gift to the world is that you're trusting that the way you write allows for the goodness to flow through you. And Beth's thoughtful questions just helped us see the insight and the research, and also your commitment to giving women voice in our time. There are a few men amongst us and few partners sitting at double screens, but we continue to lift up the voices of Canadian authors, and we're excited for what's next for you, but also just want to bless you and say thank you in this season, particularly as we're connecting to our own stories of living through times of conflict and our ancestors, and then giving hope for this time in our world. We are grateful for the artists who continue to give us hope. So be blessed into that next chapter. And thanks for spending time with us. The chat's open if people want to offer any comments. And we are gonna, we get to bless Jennette to her free time, and we're gonna stay for a little bit more book club. If people want to stay on, that's fine. But I will turn it over to Anne to just flag for you your calendar date for the next Islington Reads, and hopefully we'll see you again soon, Jennette. So keep writing.
Thank you so much. Now,
Yeah.
do I sign out now or do I
Yeah,
stay?
you're free. You're blessed into the next into the evening. So,
Well, I
um,
haven't had my supper yet, so I
yeah,
might do that, but it's just been a real joy. Thank you so much.
good plan. Bless you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Take
Thank you.
care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.